Now I want to, of course, introduce James Bultema. James is, as you can see in your program, he's got a very, very interesting background. I believe, if I'm not mistaken now, you are venturing into fiction writing. But he's a historian going back many, many years. He was a member of street cop, as he called it, of the Los Angeles Police Department before he retired from there. And he's done a number of other things until he has arrived as president of the Ulysses S. Grant Association and Presidential Library. And we are very, very pleased to have him here. The library, as many of you know, is just where it belongs in the state of Mississippi. But James is, I think you live in Phoenix these days. But in any case, no more talk from me. I hand you James Bultema.
All right, then. George runs a tight ship, so I want you to note that I get an extra 5 minutes here, okay, George? First thing I want to do before I say a word, I'd like all the veterans to please stand and be acknowledged. All you veterans. Thank you. We don't get thanked enough, you veterans don't. And us Vietnam generation, we always appreciate the thank yous. First thing I do when I meet a veteran from Vietnam, welcome home, brother or sister. That's the way it is. Okay, I want to thank Mark and Greg. I want to thank the Soldiers Memorial for inviting me, the National U.S. Grant Trail Association, which I now have a pleasure of understanding, and once you understand it, you can push it better, and the Missouri Historical Society. I had a nice joke about Grant, but since we're going to be tight on time, I'll save it maybe at the last. It's a cute one. Collecting Ulysses S. Grant has been a lifelong project of mine. I became interested in Grant in the 1970s. I was married in 1972 to a woman that's sitting over here that really enjoys life and books. I was a 180. I barely made it out of high school. I had no interest in history or anything like that. But she took me into a bookstore in Santa Barbara, and I was bored as heck, and she's, oh, look at this, and yeah, sure, sweetheart. Anyways, so I'm walking the aisles on my own, and I come across this book laying on a shelf all by itself. It's all tattered and ripped up, and, oh, that's right, I gotta, excuse me. Whoop, yep. How am I doing so far? All right, we're gonna find my slides, I am sorry. There we go. Where was I? Okay. So here's this book laying there on the shelf. Remember, no interest in it. So there's a steel engraving on the top. It's from 1868, and there's the cover sheet from it, and by Richardson's. And I said, oh, this is interesting. Look at this guy. And then I looked at the date, published in 1869 or whatever it is, 69. I said, that's impossible. They wouldn't have books last that long. So that's where I was coming from. But I said, what the heck? It was $1, so I picked it up because it was such bad shape. So I read that book, and from that book, I just got so inspired about history, the Civil War. I went to college. I got a degree in history, master's degree in history, all from picking up that book in that bookstore. So I think there's things in us that you just don't know until something happens and you go, yeah, that's so interesting. So I've been with the Ulysses S. Grant Association since the 70s and the president the last 3 years or so. And my collection that I did all those years, and it was before the internet, most of my collection was by letter writing and travel in the United States to get these different photos. But I should mention, people will always ask me this, there is a book, it's finished, it's completed. Southern Illinois University Press is going to publish it, but legal issues arose, very serious ones. Hard to, like a scammer. Well, he's a crook in my book. Anyways, so he claimed he wrote the book, and so the legal issues. So the book isn't published yet, but we shall see. So I wanted to do this book on pictures. I wanted Grant to narrate the book using his own words of what was going on in his life at the time when the cameraman snapped the image. The result is not only an image of Grant, but precisely what he was experiencing in life at the time that you see this photographs. So using the papers, excuse me, I don't want to hit the computer again. We'll be at the end of the show. All right. So here's one of the early photographs. A lot of these you'll say, oh yeah, I've seen those. Hopefully you're going to see some that you haven't seen before. From his first Civil War victory at Fort Donelson, Grant found himself in the headlines of the nation's newspapers. Victory after victory marked Grant as one of the most popular personalities in the nation. Photographers would travel long distances just to photograph the rising star of the Union Army. And it was sound business practices because the photographers, his popularity, they had great sales of Grant. And notice how long his beard is in this, and also he was never that formal. This is one of the first photograph that I know of taken as a brigadier general at the onset of the war. Matthew Brady was the first to photograph and recognize the new emerging hero, the man who would be most associated with documenting the Civil War using photographs, dispatched one of his 20 field photographers to the Western Theater in the spring of 1862. Now we're getting into a series. It was time before the ravages of war began to age the man. In this photograph, right at the beginning of the Civil War, he looks confident, he looks self-assured. No longer would the war hero travel without being recognized. At about the time this series was taken, Grant wrote openly about one of his first battles. Quote, as we approached the brow of the hill, my heart kept getting higher and higher until it felt to me it was in my throat. I would have given anything then to have been back in Illinois, but I kept right on. When the valley below was in full view, I halted. The enemy troops were gone. My heart resumed its place, and it occurred to me at once that they had been as much afraid as me as I of them. This was a view of the question I have never taken before, but one that I never forgot afterwards. So this is some of the things that he's thinking about when these photographs are taken. Really a great shot. And there's three more. Grant over this period sat for, and here's these photographs right here. They made a lot of different, they're on everything you can imagine. And steel prints, ribbons, that sort of thing. So Grant sat for, let me see where that slide is. There we go. Grant sat for over 65 different photographers on 107 occasions. American could not get enough of Grant. Much has been written concerning who was the most photographed America of the 19th century. Our nation enjoys putting people in appropriate categories, such as who was the best quarterback of all time, the best baseball player, you know what I'm talking about. So the title of the most photographed American of the 19th century is no different. If you Google the subject, page after page comes up identifying Frederick Douglass, the most photographed person from his era. In fact, the first 3.5 pages of Google mention no other person but Douglass. There seems to be no disagreement that the famous African-American abolitionist, speaker, and statesman holds the title with 168 photos. Got it? 168. But what about George Custer? Famous guy. He has 155. Okay, how about Abraham Lincoln? Well, he might have had a chance if he hadn't been assassinated. There's 130 photographs of Lincoln. Time to correct the historical record. In my decades-long search for Ulysses S. Grant photographs, I have been able to identify 314 images. From this earliest daguerreotype in 1843, the first, until his death in 1885, the last, he was by far the most photographed American of the 19th century. Now we're saying American, you go to England and stuff and there's others that would, but we're talking in America. The next three photographs are exceedingly scarce of Grant in their own right, but more so because Grant rarely wore a formal uniform. He was much more comfortable in a private uniform with the shoulder boards of a general attached as an afterthought. These three images were taken by the photographers assigned to the Army of the Cumberland. Grant was so busy in the beginning of the Civil War, you can see that he didn't even have a time to get a haircut or, I mean, to see his hair this long, this is the longest his hair was in any of the photographs I've seen. This is a rare photograph. Why? Because he has his eyes closed or almost closed, and that's just not going to have much of sale value for the photographers. But it's interesting, and since it's rare, I wanted to include it. Another formal photograph, which Grant did, but very rarely. He just wasn't into that. Another close-up. Some of these should seem rare to you because they are. Another one here, Major General, excuse me. So Ulysses S. Grant, Lieutenant General, 1864 to 1868. This view by Taylor and Huntington was released 25 years after the Civil War. The negatives were found in a building that Alexander Gardner, a lot of you know him as a famous war photographer, Taylor and Huntington purchased the negatives and produced photographs from them, the War for the Union series. Most of the negatives were from Gardner's notable publication, Photographic Incidents of the Civil War. Additional negatives from the Matthew Brady collection, although these images were printed in the early 1890s, the quality is excellent because they came from the original glass plate negatives. If you think about it, photography in its early stages here, they were just so well done. I mean, you can count the whiskers on his chin. Soon after his appointment to Lieutenant General, Grant was back in Washington. On March 23rd, Grant, accompanied by Edward Stanton, Secretary of the War, sat for a series of photographs by Matthew Brady to commemorate Grant's promotion, signifying the importance of the event. Brady blocked out the entire day for this historical shoot. The wired rim spectacle Brady positioned the camera directly under a skylight. Not satisfied with the lighting, Brady ordered an assistant to climb up on the roof and remove a covering that was blocking the sun from the window. Suddenly there was a terrible noise as the assistant slipped and crashed his foot through the 2-inch thick glass pane. The heavy glass fell in a huge pointed chunk, slamming into the floor around Grant. Fortunately, none of the glass hit the general, who casually looked up to see what had happened with such coolness that Brady exclaimed later, "That's the most remarkable display of nerve I have ever witnessed." Secretary Stanton, good politician he was, scolded the photographer, Brady. "Never breathe a word about this," he went on. "It would be impossible to convince the people that this was not an attempt at an assassination." That's when these photos are taken, and you look at them, yeah, that's Grant. Grant's promotion was historical, but as Brady was taking this set of images, Grant's thoughts were of his son Jesse. In a letter to Julia, he wrote, now right when this, so he's sitting here, but I want you to understand what he's thinking. Is he thinking, well, should I turn my chin? There's one thing I learned in Washington, Julia, just on leaving that wants attending to. You know, breakfast lasts from early in the morning till about noon, and dinner from that time until night. Jess runs up the house loose and seeing the guests at meals thinks each time is a new meal and that he must necessarily eat. In this way, he eats 5 or 6 times each day and dips largely into the desserts. If not looked after, he will make himself sick. So this is what Grant's thinking. He's a dad. He's taking care of his kid, and he doesn't like to see him eating all those desserts. So about this time of these photographs, Grant received a letter from President Lincoln. The commander-in-chief praised Grant and wrote that he had entire satisfaction with his general, giving him carte blanche in this operation. Lincoln stated, "The particulars of your plans I neither know or seek to know. I wish not to obtrude in any constraints or restraints about you." Grant wrote back, "From my first entrance into the volunteer service of the country to the present day, I've never had cause or complaint, have never expressed or implied a complaint against the administration or the Secretary of War for throwing any embarrassment in the way of my vigorously prosecuting what appeared to be my duty. Should my success be less than I desire and expect, the least I can say is the fault is not with you." Although this photograph is heavily retouched and appears to be a partial composite of images, it is very popular, circulate. This version, there's so many versions of this. This is the best one I ever found with a Gardner marking on it. These are really real popular. In the summer of 1864, the family came to visit their father while he was in the field. At the time, Fred was 14, Buck 12, Nellie 9, and Jesse 6. Colonel Horace Porter, Grant's aide-de-camp, had easy access to the general and wrote a book about his experience, including this observation. So visualize this as Porter writes it. "The general was exceedingly fond of his family, and his meeting with them afforded him the happiest days he had had since they parted. The morning after they arrived, when I stepped into the general's tent, I found him in short sleeves, engaged in a rough and tumble wrestling match with his older boys. He had become red in the face and seemed nearly out of breath from exertion. The lads had just tripped him up, and he was on his knees on the floor grappling with the youngsters and joining the merry laughter as if he was a boy again." Now, everybody knows this photo. If you don't, I don't know where you've been. This photograph of Grant leaning against the tree in front of his personal tent has, without a doubt, become the most iconic image of Grant ever published. If someone is looking for or has just seen one image of the general, it will usually be this view, this original uncropped view as taken by Brady. This is the uncropped, this is the view that was taken. Now you see close-ups and a lot of changes, but when I deal with these, I like to get as original as you can, going back to the way it was first taken. So this is at Cold Harbor, June 11th, 1864. One of my favorite shots because, by the way, there's not one photograph of Grant, there is one when he was president, and it's very rare, and to find a clean copy is almost impossible. So even to stand next to a horse is something, because Grant was only that one photograph, which I think I have in here. I hope I do. Ulysses S. Grant's most famous horse, Cincinnati, came as a gift. The fine-looking chestnut stood at 17 hands and was exceptionally strong. The steed was a perfect fit for Grant as he chose the strongest mounts to ride. It was reported that Cincinnati could scarcely be held back from the sound of battle and would run at a full gallop towards the sound of gunfire. Now, that's the kind of horse you want under you, right? I'd probably get one and say, let's go the other way. Not Grant, not me either. This is taken October 6th to the 9th, 1864 by Brady. Porter wrote of this view regarding Julia, which sort of dovetails into what we just talked about. She visited any officers or soldiers who were sick, went to the cook and suggested delicacies for their comfort, took their meals with their mess, kept up a pleasant run of conversation at the table, and added gently to the cheerfulness of the headquarters. Grant's aide also documented just how close the two were. They would seek a quiet corner of his quarters of an evening and sit with her hand in his, manifesting the most ardent devotion and its staff officer came in accidentally upon them, they would look as bashful as two young lovers spied upon in the scenes of their courtship. So that's, everything that I read is exactly, how many are familiar with the papers of the Ulysses S. Grant? 33 volumes. John Simon started that, and wow, it's just, for research on Grant, what you want to know what he did every minute of the day, check that out. It's also online. To get Grant out of the studio, the photographer loses control of his environment. So to see outdoor photographs is pretty rare. Here's two of them right here. This is Lieutenant Grant in the field, City Point, Virginia, March 15, 1865. With the surrender of Lee just 3 days before this image was taken, Grant's staff formed up for one final photograph to commemorate their victory. This was the last photograph of General Grant in the field. He left for Washington, D.C. just a short time after this image was taken. Grant is seated, flanked by his staff, in front of his winter cabin, which was built in November of 1864. To the immediate left of Grant is General Marcina Patrick, identified with a long white beard. He's important to this photograph because it was his diary that he referred to this image as Brady's grand photograph. Now, these are really well done by Gudekest. This was taken May 5th, 1865. Grant, and for whatever reason, you can just see the outline of the ribbon that was, for whatever reason, erased out of the negative. Grant wearing a black mourning ribbon on his left arm for Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated on April 14th, just 5 days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. The victorious general stares unflinchingly into the camera lens, his left hand partially inserted into the lapel of his waistcoat, in a pose very popular in 19th century military circles, emulating the stance of Napoleon Bonaparte in David's famous portrait, Napoleon in his study, painted in 1812. On March 10th, 1866, Grant wrote to Gudekest, "I beg to acknowledge the receipt of the photographs and carts you have been good enough to send me. I believe there has been no better likeness taken of me than those from your establishment. This image is quite possibly the very photograph Grant is referring to." This was in my collection. On the verso is written, "General U.S. Grant from F. Gudekest." So I think that really seals the deal about what Grant's talking about. Another one of my favorite photographs. This is Grant with staff officer, September 23rd, 1865. Colonel Adam Boudreau, left in the image, was Grant's aide-de-camp, who later became a brevet general and wrote the military history of Ulysses S. Grant. Colonel Babcock was a West Point graduate and was Grant's aide-de-camp, who delivered the final surrender summons and escorted General Lee to Appomattox Courthouse and was present to witness Lee's surrender. If you really look at this closely, first off, Grant has cigars in his hands a lot. As you know, he smoked 15 to 20 a day once the public found out and they just mailed him all these cigars. But if I blow this up, you can see the smoke gently filtering up from the cigar. It's quite a shot. This one is taken in September of 1865. This series of images is extremely scarce. This is the only time since being promoted to Lieutenant General that Grant wore his uniform jacket completely buttoned up. And now you go, oh, yeah, well, if you collect Grant images, you know Grant. He just didn't dress like this. Now he's got the sword on again. I don't know whether the photographer talked him into it, or which would be my guess, because he just didn't like to wear that. So we're going to go now to General of the Army, 1866-69. This is, of course, I say this almost every, this is one of my favorites. This one, I just love the Grant photographs. What can I tell you? This is General Grant with Secretary of War Gideon Welles, President Andrew Johnson at the home of ex-Governor Enos Thrope, Auburn, New York, August 31st, 1866 at dusk. So it's marked on it. Johnson was touring the Northeast during his ineffective 1866 campaign to promote leniency towards the South. Grant was heard to comment he was sick of it. quote, "I am disgusted at hearing a man make speeches on the way to his own funeral." But this is rare because this is the only photograph of Grant where there's alcohol in the shot. There's bottles of wine or whatever it is. You can see the level of the glasses. And you look closely, Grant's isn't empty. It's half full, so he's along with everyone else. Good for you. The only photograph known of Grant with Custer, you got to look closely. Identified in this scarce photograph, left to right, standing Wesley Merritt, Albion Hull. Number 3 is George Custer. Seated is Warren, Secretary of the Navy Wells, President Johnson, Alfred Pleasanton, Secretary of State Seward, General Grant, you see him, and Admiral Farragut. I have a pointer if nobody, it's easy to figure out. Yeah. This unusual photograph was based on the invention of a photosculpturist. It was developed in 1859. Grant was one of the first ones to sit for this Frenchman. They used 24 cameras, and the negative was used, which molds can be made to construct a bronze statue. One of their first subjects was Grant. He would never turn down a request, by the way, even though he had complained in letters and stuff that he's sick of doing all this, is wait, you know, but he was always pleasant, and he never would, that I saw, ever turn down a photographer. The long metal stand with the projecting prongs was to hold Grant's head steady because of the long exposure of the camera. You're familiar with that. And when they shoot it, they have 24 cameras here, so you see it, but normally you'd never see that. This is the Peabody Southern Education Fund Board of Trustees held at the Willard Hotel. This is a print from the original photograph. I can't find the original photograph. I have somewhere it's cropped and it starts with Farragut in the middle and goes to our right. George Peabody, seated to the right of Grant, proposed as a merchant in the U.S. and London. Among many charitable institutions, he established the Peabody Education Fund in February of '67 with a donation of $1 million. And Grant was asked to serve on the board and did. So this is Grant when he was a nominee for President of the United States. This series of photographs are the last images of Grant in uniform. On May 21st, 1868, the National Union Republic Convention nominated Grant for President of the United States. This concluded Grant's tenure in the Army, beginning with the first photograph in 1843. This is entitled A Memorable Gathering of Illustrious U.S. Army Officers, Fort Sanders, Laramie City, Wyoming. In July of '68, General Grant decided to take a well-earned vacation. Accompanying him were 2 of his best friends, Sherman and Sheridan. Also along for the trip with his son, Ulysses S. Grant, Jr., who went by the nickname of Buck. Along the way, the party was stopped at Fort Sanders, Wyoming Territory, where this photograph was taken. Grant is on your left, standing under the bird cage with the civilian clothes on. And by the way, there's a great write-up in his letters to Julia while they were traveling by train. They were shooting the buffalo as they'd run by or as the train drove by. And so you read about these things, but Grant and his son and Sherman and Sheridan were all shooting buffalo as they traveled to Laramie, Wyoming. Some of these photographs I look at, this photograph when I was collecting, I knew of, I had to have it. I was at a photo show, this guy would go walking around. And this is one, excuse me, dear, I never told, no, I won't say it. I got the photo, but it was one of the hardest ones I've ever gotten, so. What we have here is Grant in Galena, Illinois, around August '68. Grant again declared how he loved his time spent in Galena and despised his time in Washington. Letter after letter makes this obvious to his father. I have enjoyed my summer's vacation very much and look forward with dread to my return to Washington. To an attorney, Grant wrote his friend, I have had the most quiet, pleasant time in this summer that has fallen to my lot since the opening of the rebellion in '61. I want to make the most of it, not knowing when the same opportunity will present itself again. Letter after letter, he talks about not wanting to go back to Washington, D.C. This one is taken by Vanderson and Jones in '68 from Richmond, Virginia, same people that took the famous images of Robert E. Lee. So they got Robert E. Lee and then these of Grant. Okay, as President of the United States, 69 to 77, how are we doing, George? I forgot to stop my stopwatch. When I see you standing and yelling. Okay. So here we have Grant, President of the United States. This view was taken at the Tip Top House in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, just 1 hour after the train photographs. And if you look closely, you'll see Grant. I did a close-up on the one side. He's standing, what, third from the left. You can see his daughter and son, and Julia, excuse me. So a few minutes later, or a few hours later, now they're on top of the mountain. This view was taken at the Tip Top House in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, just 1 hour after the train photograph. The Grants are bundled up as there was a persistent, strong northeast wind with a temperature at only 44 degrees. I like his son, Jesse, leaning against his father. Look closely and you'll see it. A spontaneous moment captured by the photographer, the son cuddling up next to his dad because he was chilly. Really fabulous photograph. This is taken at Long Branch, as you know, is Summer White House. From left to right, written on the verso, is Henry the butler, Mrs. U.S. Grant, General Grant, Miss Nellie Grant, Ferdinand, as they wrote this, colored valet, Jesse R. Grant, U.S. Grant Jr., known as Buck. And the boy behind Buck Grant is Willie Coles, a friend of his son. So he got his playmate in there. This is a reception of President at Glen Falls, New York. How many of you seen this before? No one. Yeah, it's a rare one. Grant can be seen sitting in the carriage with a top hat looking to his right. The photographer did a commendable job clearing a path through the crowd so as to capture this image that was taken in front of the Rockwell House. I mean, you can see how many people are there. So to get that photographer to clear that, anybody in this business knows it's not easy. So it's just really rare, this view. And in the close-up, you can see Grant looking away from the camera. This is the Aztec Club with Grant in 1873. The label reads, "The Aztec Club members and guests present at the anniversary dinner given by the president, General Robert Patterson, at his residence. The Aztec Club was a military fraternity founded by officers of the U.S. Army from the Mexican War." This is a series, residence of Judge Hoare with President Grant and Cabinet, Concord, Massachusetts, April of '75. In it is Vice President Henry Wilson, Grant, Belknap, Secretary of State Hamilton Fish, Secretary of the Navy George Robinson, Secretary of Interior, and the Postmaster General Jewell. They were celebrating the 1975 centennial celebration of the battles of Lexington and Concord, and that's why Grant made that trip. And there we have a picture of Grant with his cabinet. And the people I just read were for this slide, so forget what I said about the other one. So you get an idea, just looking at Grant second from the left. You hear that he was small in stature. I think a photograph tells you everything, right? But really a very rare photograph. This is the presidential portrait of Grant that hangs in the White House, and that's the photograph by Kurtz that it was taken from. You can see how careful they were, even the placement of his hands, the way that his jacket is turned out. So they were but it came from that photograph. This is, of course, you never see Grant without a full beard, so there must be a story behind that, and some of you may not know it. Here's a quote from Frederick, his son, who explains it all for us. The taking of the photographs in profile was the occasion of my father's shaving for the second time that I ever knew of. My mother had asked him to have a profile taken so that she might send it to Rome to have a cameo cut. Thinking that she wanted a profile of his features, they need to talk more. He got shaved and had these pictures taken, very much to the disgust of my mother, who did not accept them for the cameo, but waited until his beard grew out again and then had it and sent it out. I don't know what they were talking about at the dinner table that night. Okay, Grant's trip around the world. This is Grant and Julia aboard the USS Vandalia, December of 1877. And that's his son next to him. Collecting photographs, it's really hard. His trip around the world, 2 years. I mean, he traveled so many places. There's photographers there too. So I'll show you a few that I was able to uncover, but each one is quite rare. So this is one that's taken in Paris. This is one of my favorites. Some of us were talking about it earlier, January of 1878. The Grants are seen sitting in the ruins of Karnak Temple Complex in the ancient city of Thebes, Egypt. Grant is featured at left of center, sitting next to his wife Julia, wearing a pith helmet. His son Jesse is seated in front of him with a child in his lap. They are surrounded by the entourage and a group of locals. And I know I keep saying this because I picked some of the rares. This one I know no one's seen. It's so rare that it took me years and years to find it. This is in Bangkok, Siam, April of '79. Different dignitaries that were along. Published by Tabor, San Francisco. He was big on Grant's trip around the world and published several photographs that he must have gotten the negatives for because they have his markings. I love this photo a lot. This is General Grant and his son Frederick. They just arrived from their trip around the world. This is September 22nd, 1879. Really well-constructed photograph. Another one from his trip around the world. His final years. This is Julia and his granddaughter in Santa Fe, New Mexico, July 14th, 1880. And Grant wrote, "I assure you that to a soldier there is nothing so gratifying as to have the goodwill and respect of the people whom he has served or tried to serve. In the positions that I have been, both military and civil, it has been my effort to render the very best service in my power for the whole people, without respect to race, color, previous condition, or political affiliation." Of all the photographs you've seen, this is the rarest, and let me explain why. This is taken by an amateur. Written on the verso of this only known photograph is in period handwriting documented that the image was taken by an amateur photographer who accidentally dropped the negative, destroyed it, just after taking and printing this one single image. So when you're searching for Grant images, you come across something like this, keeps you smiling for the next year.
Yeah.
Anybody who collects anything, the fun is in the hunt, right? Just finding things. You use this photograph. I love it too. It's just, look at his granddaughter snuggling up to him. It's a great photo. This was taken in Long Branch, 1884, a year before his death. Compared to the volume of photographs taken of Grant over his life, this period from 1882 to 1884 is very scarce, with only 2 events that this author could document. In 1885, the year of Grant's death, and his family were photographed several times as the general was completing his memoirs while dying of cancer, which we're all very familiar with. This is Grant and family on the porch, June 19th, 1885. Fighting each day through exerting pain, Grant fought to finish his memoirs and provide for his family after he was gone. But all the while, the general stayed positive and saw good coming from dying. To his doctor, Grant wrote, he couldn't talk, "If it is written within God's providence that I should go now, I am ready to obey his call without a murmur. I should prefer not I should prefer going now to enduring my present suffering for a single day without hope of recovery. So that's pretty powerful stuff. That's what is going through his mind as he's sitting here dying. All right, these are everybody says this is the last photograph of Grant. Well, in my research, there's 3 last photographs, so you pick. I did, and I know which one is. This isn't it. So Gilman of New York took the last 4 images of Grant on July 18th, 1885. At least 4 photographs were taken that Wednesday. There are several identifiers that tie these images together. They are Grant's clothes, the position of his cane on the chair to his left, the chair to his right with 2 spittoons on them, and the door being open. For each succeeding image, Gilman moved his camera closer. This is the next one. This is the order in which they were shot. So he moved his camera closer. As Grant changed the position of the newspaper, he dropped a cloth to the wood deck. You could see it by his feet. Grant's aide, Harrison Terrell, moves into the doorway to see what's going on. So he moves his camera, now even closer to Grant, who paid him no attention and simply continued to read his paper. And so they call this the last photograph too. While going through Julia's collection at the Grant Presidential Library, another last photograph was discovered. This is the one that Harrison Terrell is now much more in focus. Well, not really, but he's sitting there on the side. And this gives you an idea of how many photographs that were taken that day. And I'm going to take, I have about 2 minutes. Okay, you're going to see 2 photos that have never been published before and never been seen. This one, laying the cornerstone by President Grant at the Town Hall of Washington, Pennsylvania, September 18th, 1869. I just came across this one recently, so there's no record of this one anywhere. And it's hard to see him and stuff, but still, it's rare. There's Grant doing his job. All right, remember I talked about they make the photos, the engravings and stuff? You can see the holes where the 24 cameras are. You see that they have them centered right under it. He's smoking a cigar again. The numbers line up to the cameras. And so they take this photograph, and this is rare, unpublished. I just came across it. There's some where he's standing and some where he's sitting another way, but what that guy with the hood is doing in the background, I don't know, but it sure is interesting. So that concludes my part of it. I just want to say it's been a pleasure collecting these images. It means so much to me, as you can probably tell, but I think it really gives you an idea, an insight into Grant. I used to read about him, but here are his images and what he was thinking and doing.